I just realized I wasn't on the stage where everyone can see me. So now hopefully everyone can see me. But we host monthly webinars. We'll get going here in a minute, just allowing the last couple people to join. But we host monthly webinars. Really, every month is a different topic. So just please stay up to date. Please just keep up with the website, the email notifications on social media, so you can see what we have in offering for you. Today is a fun one for me because I know Anthony pretty well now for over a year, Anthony. And what Anthony talks about is maybe a bit different than what our, the typical courses or typical webinars are about. Anthony is a registered yoga teacher and a yoga expert, and he teaches meditation and is just very involved in that world, but also through the prism of healing, not only through the prism of acrobatic moves and the ability to meditate for long periods of minutes, but the ability to connect everyday practices into the general healing of human beings. So everyone on this call, most people that follow us, most people that purchase our courses are healers themselves. They're therapists, healthcare professionals, even fitness professionals or personal trainers who work with clients. Our overall mission is to make everyone, better. So a massive tool that unfortunately it took me many years in my life to A, be introduced to properly, and B, learn to respect and integrate into my daily practices, yoga and meditation. At first I thought that it's, so far-fetched from me. But then also with Anthony's help, I realized that there's, yoga can be broken down into a million little pieces, and meditation and mindfulness can also be broken down into a million small bits and pieces. And I think listening, and you will see today how implementing little bits of yoga and little bits of meditation, little bits of mindfulness into your already ongoing practices and ongoing schedules and ongoing protocols, you'll see massive benefits even from implementing little bits and pieces. So on that note, I'm very happy to officially here, I'll click and add you to the stage, Anthony, but to present Anthony Berlingeri, based in Canada. And we have had the pleasure of working with him now for over a year, producing a couple courses and working on some other big projects that will release early next year. So also be on the lookout. And I hope I didn't miss anything. And on that note, I will add you to the stage, Anthony, and it is yours. So feel free to take it from here. Again, to anyone listening, please save your questions to the end. Feel free to type in your questions into the chat box on the right-hand side of the screen. If it's something relevant for the ongoing presentation, I will read it out to Anthony to respond to. If not, I'll save it to the last 10, 15 minutes of this hour webinar. So thank you very much. And Anthony, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Danny. I appreciate that. And nice to meet you all. My name is Anthony. I'm really excited to take you through this presentation on, I've called it mindfulness just because mindfulness is sort of an umbrella for some of the things Danny just mentioned. So I teach yoga and meditation, which fit into mindfulness. And so we're going to go over some science just to better understand the practice, because I feel like not only does the science support your understanding of what it is we're trying to do when we practice, it also sort of gives you some incentive, because the research out there is actually pretty extensive, and it's amazing what mindfulness can do in terms of how it changes structures within your brain, which affect your nervous system, your mental health, your physical health, and your emotional health. And so I thought we'd start with a lot of science to sort of dive into the practice, and then we'll actually get a chance to practice at the end, because I feel like, the most important thing is really understanding how to adopt a mindfulness practice, and specifically how to make it practical, because as Danny mentioned, there's so many ways we can tap into mindfulness. There's yoga, there's meditation, and then there's just the simple practice of awareness, which really, that's what sums up mindfulness. It's a practice in deep focus, a practice in attention, a practice in bringing your awareness into the present moment. And it's amazing not only how that makes you feel, but some of the changes that can take place in your brain when you adopt a practice like mindfulness. And so what I'll do is I'll just take a moment to pull my presentation up and make sure that we're good to go and that things are sharing properly. And then we'll dive into some of this. Not the presentation. Okay. Gotcha. Okay, so we've got entire screen, Chrome tab window. Here we go. Okay, awesome. All right. So, yeah, I'm here to talk about mindfulness, just essentially really explain the practice of mindfulness. And thought I would start with just a basic introduction to who I am, what got me into the practice, and just sort of explain some of the work that I've been doing over in Canada and in other parts of the world. And so, as I mentioned, my name's Anthony Berlingeri. I'm a yoga and meditation teacher, as well as a course and content creator and the visionary behind Nature of Mindfulness. And so for over a decade, I've been developing and teaching mindfulness programs for schools, hospitals, and large corporations, and then more so recently for online platforms like Neil Asher. And so what got me into the practice was a very synchronistic moment with my sister. Actually, she encouraged me to come to a yoga class with her. I had no idea what I was getting into. I was somebody that was extremely tight in my body. In fact, I would go to a physical therapist in my teenage years when I was like, 13, 14 years old. And he would put me on his table and he'd stretch me out. And he would literally say to me, you're tighter than 50-year-olds that come into my office. And so for me, that was sort of the main draw, was just the physical ailments, the tightness, the discomfort that I had in my body. I would love to run, and then I would have knee issues. I struggled with lower back pain from, my teenage years into my early adolescence. And I was just way too young to be dealing with some of those physical issues. And so when my sister brought me to this yoga class, instantly I was so impressed by what people were able to do around me, not only their flexibility, but their focus. And it was in a hot room. And so I couldn't even tolerate being in the heat, let alone watching everyone around me. Not only were they able to be in the heat, but they were able to do extraordinary things with their bodies. And so even though I was awful at it, even though I struggled through the whole practice, I was on the verge of a panic attack the entire time, something really clicked within me. And the thing that impressed me was just that, how is it possible that I was able to have the experience that I was having, yet everyone around me was having an entirely different experience? And it almost looked blissful, it looked peaceful. And here I am on the verge of a panic attack. And so I got really hooked. I went from like my first practice to practicing every single week. I would go multiple times in a week, sometimes every day in a week, because I was noticing such a huge difference in how my body felt and how my mind felt. And there was this moment where you realize that so much of the practice isn't even physical. Of course, it's physical, it's movement, it's stretching, but it's actually mental more than anything. And the mental part is just how our thoughts and how our mind really do affect the experience that we're having in life. And the moment we get into a negative headspace where we overthink things, that's when we really start to struggle. And it doesn't mean that we can't be in uncomfortable situations that aren't challenging, but so much of what we experience in life is actually happening in our thoughts and in our head. And yoga really gives you a practice or a technique to transcend those thoughts. And so we're actually moving beyond thought and we're moving into what I call awareness. And so that's what yoga is. That's what meditation is. That's what mindfulness is. It's a practice in awareness, because awareness is different than thought. Thought is a layer of mind. Of course, all of us think, it's how our brain works, but then awareness is when we move past that and we actually connect deeper to our senses, to our nervous system, to our body, to experiencing the moment through the actual experience of our senses versus how our mind is interpreting that. Okay. And so that's what got me into yoga. And then in terms of my teaching, one of the biggest areas for me has been introducing schools to mindfulness. And so a lot of the work that I do in Canada is research-based. And so schools would hire me to come in and develop mindfulness programs. I would implement them. And in some cases, the research department of the school would actually gather evidence, anecdotal evidence to support the need for mindfulness. And some of the results were incredible in terms of how yoga was helping youth with their studies, with their learning, and most importantly, with their mental health, as that was one of the main reasons schools were bringing me in. It was to address the need for mental health support for kids, because Anxiety is one of the things that so many young kids struggle with. I mean, of course, all of us deal with stress and anxiety, but sometimes it can be overwhelming. And so there's such a need for mindfulness in schools, as well as hospitals. A lot of my work here in Canada has been running mindfulness programming for healthcare personnel, doctors, nurses, and anyone that works within healthcare, as obviously healthcare is a very stressful industry. And so anytime there's stress, anytime mental health is a worry, mindfulness is such a great anecdote to that. And so a lot of my work has also been in hospitals, as well as for large corporations. And as I mentioned, online platforms like Neil Asher. And so let's talk about mindfulness now in terms of really understanding what it is. I mentioned earlier that it's a practice in awareness, but what's kind of interesting is understanding the history of mindfulness, because a lot of us assume that mindfulness or meditation comes from India, that it is a Buddhist or Hindu practice, and there is truth to that. But there's actually a much more rich and diverse history to mindfulness, which actually adds not only a little bit of fascination surrounding the practice, but a little bit of understanding of just how innate the practice of mindfulness is, how natural it comes to humans. And so if we look at the history of mindfulness, mindfulness is rooted in the practice of meditation, which is as old as humanity itself. It's actually quite difficult to verify how old meditation is and where exactly it comes from. There are multiple references to meditative practices across a variety of ancient cultures, including the early Egyptian and Mayan civilizations, as well as in Aboriginal communities across the globe. Meditation is also referred or referenced in many religions, including Judaism, Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, and Buddhism. And so that's meditation, that's yoga. If we were to go back into history, obviously it's hard to really pinpoint where the practice originates from. And that's mostly to do to the fact that it actually has originated in multiple places. And so the early Egyptians, the Mayan civilizations, all of our Aboriginal communities have a form of meditation. Now there's different techniques, different practices, different lineages where we start to see a variety in meditation. And obviously, when I refer to the religions that mention meditation, there's always a slightly different interpretation or understanding of what that is. And so the important thing is just to acknowledge that obviously there's a significance to a practice that shows up in multiple places at multiple times and in multiple cultures. And so there's obviously a deeper significance to how meditation is not only a part of our roots, but also can continue to support us, because obviously a lot of wisdom really does come from our past. A lot of our wisdom comes from, these ancestors that passed down this knowledge, and our understanding of what meditation is today is different. However, it is also rooted in that rich history. Okay, and so now let's talk about how it differs today. And so if we were to look at the word mindfulness, mindfulness really is a recent word. It is a Western word to adapt a lot of those practices and to really separate them from a lot of their religious associations more so than anything. And so mindfulness is actually viewed through the lens of science. And so mindfulness has been adapted from the practice of meditation, so that there is no religious or spiritual association, and so that the techniques offered are strictly evidence-based and proven to increase focus, reduce stress, and support positive mental health. Okay, and so really what mindfulness was a way to take these practices like yoga and meditation and to remove any sort of doctrine around them, any sort of spiritual approach, so that really we could look at it through the lens of evidence, through the lens of data, and get rid of any sort of bias or any sort of things that can take us away from the techniques and practice itself. And so when I'm referring to mindfulness, I'm really talking about the evidence that we have that has, like all science, is done in accordance with the scientific method. And so if we were to look at the research surrounding meditation, one of the studies that I always referred to is a Harvard study. This study is really fascinating. It shows us how the brain can change. And when we understand the way the brain changes, it also helps us to understand really what the benefits are and what it is that meditation can help us with. And so this Harvard study I'm about to share with you was recently conducted, and it studied the effects of mindfulness on the brain specifically. And so Harvard discovered that significant structural changes took place in participants' neuroplasticity after 8 weeks of daily mindfulness practice. Okay, and so just a couple other things worth mentioning. This study that Harvard did was with absolute beginners. And so these aren't experienced meditators. These are people that had zero experience with meditation. And another interesting fact was that even though the study took place over 8 weeks, Harvard provided all of the participants with a recording that they were to listen to every single day. And so the length of that recording was 27 minutes. Okay, and so a lot of this evidence I'm about to share with you proves that these changes take place in your brain if you were to practice meditation for 8 weeks and you were to meditate for 27 minutes a day. Now, you can break up those 27 minutes. So say you do 20 minutes in the morning, then you would do 7 minutes at night. And so in order to achieve these results, according to Harvard, that is the length of time, 8 weeks and 27 minutes a day. Now, the first change that happens in the brain actually takes place in the hippocampus. Okay, and so Harvard noticed through MRIs, and so they took an MRI before and after 8 weeks. And when they looked at that MRI after 8 weeks, one of the things they noticed was that the brain's gray matter density surrounding the hippocampus increases in mass. And so the growth in this specific region is believed to be responsible for enhancing brain functions related to learning, memory, empathy, and self-awareness. And so the reason why this evidence suggests that it helps those specific attributes, so learning, memory, empathy, and self-awareness, is due to the fact that that region of the brain, the hippocampus, is responsible for all of those functions. And so if we were to look at learning and memory, obviously, if we're practicing focus, if we're practicing attention, it makes sense that that would help us with learning and memory. As so much of the information we absorb really depends on us being present and aware of that information. And so if we're focusing on what we're learning, we're going to have a much easier time absorbing that information. Now, if we're distracted, if the mind is in a frantic state, if it's overthinking about situations that aren't even relevant to the learning itself, that's going to affect learning. And so that one is sort of clear. Now, the other two, empathy and self-awareness, this is where things actually get interesting. And, you know, if we were to go back to what the earliest teachings of meditation we're connected to, there's always this connection back to love, back to empathy, back to this idea of meditating to achieve a state of inner peace and to focus on love. You know, all religions have that theming, right? Coming back to this idea of love, centered awareness within ourself and within God. And so if we were to take that outside of the religious context and come back to the mindfulness context, where we're looking at things through a scientific lens, you know, why does meditation help with empathy? Why is that specific region of the brain, the hippocampus, directly connected to empathy? And why is it that meditation would help us with that? And so if we were to look at that through a scientific lens, all we need to really look at is this study of how PTSD, how stress, post-traumatic stress disorder affects the brain. And so it's interesting is that when someone has PTSD, or not even PTSD, but high levels of stress in general, the hippocampus actually does the opposite. And so gray matter density reduces in that area, which means if somebody's stressed, if somebody's dealing with PTSD, that stress actually affects the hippocampus and that area shrinks. And one of the things we know about PTSD is it has a direct effect on empathy. And when we're dealing with high levels of stress, it's really hard to be empathetic because we're going through our own challenges. And so the more we're able to calm our nervous system, the more we're able to relax and feel good within ourselves, that's going to affect how we respond to others. And so, of course, you know, if there's a direct connection to stress and how that affects empathy, if mindfulness is a practice that reduces stress more than anything, that is going to affect empathy directly. Now, the last one, self-awareness, this is also interesting because obviously there's a huge component on how meditation helps us to learn about ourselves. And so obviously the hippocampus is also connected to self-awareness. And I like to think of it as this really simple practice in how when we're able to quiet our mind, when we're able to reduce overthinking, and we can just take a moment to practice presence and awareness, often, it's the stress and the worry and the anxieties that take us away from our true self, whether that's acknowledging our gifts, whether that's just being able to be ourselves. Think about social anxiety. If we're socially anxious, it's the hardest thing to be your authentic self when you're socially anxious. And so anytime we're reducing anxiety, anytime we're calming the nervous system, of course, we're going to be better able to just be our true self, and also be able to remove a lot of the judgments that we put on ourselves that affect self-awareness. And so often the thing that stops us from being our true self is we're too afraid of what other people think, right? We're too worried about how other people identify who we are. And so we kind of move away from our own true identity. And so if mindfulness is a practice in letting go of anxieties, whether they're social anxieties or fears or judgment about what other people think, these are the kind of thoughts that most of us struggle with day to day. If we're honest with ourselves, it's often worrying about how others perceive us. And so just the practice of quieting that part of our mind can affect self-awareness directly. Now, let's shift over to another region of the brain. And what's interesting is that when Harvard looked at the after MRI, after 8 weeks of meditation, this specific region of the brain actually reduces in size. And so gray matter density in the amygdala reduces. And so the opposite thing happens. The hippocampus increases and the amygdala shrinks. Okay, now let's talk about the amygdala, what it's responsible for, and how this connects back to meditation. And so this region of the brain attaches emotional significance to memories, and it also modifies the strength of memories specifically related to trauma and fear. Now, the amygdala affects how you respond to stressful situations by activating the sympathetic nervous system, also known as fight or flight. Okay, and so what's interesting is that the part of our brain that activates fight or flight mode is also the part of our brain that attaches emotional significance to memories, specifically related to trauma and fear. And so if we were to go back to that lens of PTSD, somebody that's struggling with PTSD, the amygdala enlarges. And so when the amygdala enlarges, obviously that's the memory center for trauma. And so that means if you go through a traumatic experience, that's the part of your brain that's going to remember that experience. And so this is why when people who struggle with PTSD often are triggered in situations that remind them of that trauma. And so they could be in an entirely different situation that isn't actually a dangerous situation or a situation where there's meant to or needed to be a fight or flight response, yet any sort of emotional memory that triggers that initial core trauma will activate fight or flight. So we go through that exact same experience in our nervous system where things start to escalate. And so what's interesting is that when we practice meditation, mindfulness, that is one of the biggest things that happens. One of the greatest changes that takes place in the brain is the amygdala starts to shrink, which means you're less reactive, you're less in a state of fight or flight. Now, it doesn't mean that fight or flight disappears. In fact, when I do this presentation in schools, that's one of the things students ask me. They're, grade 3s, grade 4, they're so curious. And one of the things they say is, can you remove that part of your brain? Or immediately we identify the amygdala as being a bad part of the brain. And that's not true, as fight or flight is a necessary part of our nervous system. Obviously, there's a reason we go into fight or flight mode. And so it doesn't mean that as the amygdala shrinks and we practice meditation, we're never going to go into fight or flight mode, as A, that's not practical, B, it's not possible, and C, fight or flight mode serves a purpose. And so that purpose is escalating the nervous system when we need to have that escalation. And so if you're performing, it's good to go into a stress state, as that stress is going to help the body perform. Now, what is the main difference is when the amygdala is enlarged, not only do we go into fight or flight mode, but we are more overwhelmed in that state of fight or flight. So there's a difference between having a stressed response and being in full fight or flight, where our frontal lobe shuts off and we're not able to make responsible decisions. We might be reactive. And, if we're escalating the nervous system to a state of fight or flight where we lose control, this is where the practice of meditation comes in handy, as it helps us to regulate our nervous system. And it just means that we're going to be able to not go into fight or flight mode when we don't need to, and B, if we are going into fight or flight mode, it gives us tools and strategies to help regulate in that state so that we can still be in control of the situation, okay? And so obviously if someone's struggling with PTSD, for instance, as soon as they have that escalation in their nervous system, they're not going to be able to control it. Not only are they going to be overwhelmed by that state of fight or flight, not only can they be overwhelmed by that state of fight or flight, but you can actually lose control altogether. Now, let's just look at the autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system also gives us a deeper understanding of how meditation and mindfulness helps us to regulate the nervous system. And it also helps support those changes that we just talked about in the brain. And so the nervous system also plays a key role in how those regions of the brain change. Okay, and so this might be review science. I know some of you on this call are physical therapists yourself and might understand this science already, but let's just touch base on the autonomic nervous system and divide it into its two chains. And so the autonomic nervous system has two parts. We've got the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. Now, both of these systems work harmoniously to perform all of the automatic functions that keep you alive and able to perform. The autonomic nervous system regulates and controls everything from your heartbeat to breathing and digestion. The parasympathetic nervous system and sympathetic nervous system work together in opposite ways to control and regulate every single one of your organs. Okay, and so let's look at the sympathetic nervous system first. And so the sympathetic nervous system, this is your body's fight or flight mode. And so those names are interchangeable. We've got the sympathetic nervous system, or the common term fight or flight mode. Now, you can think of the sympathetic nervous system as the gas pedal of your autonomic nervous system. And so that just means when we activate the sympathetic nervous system, just like a gas pedal, things go up, right? And so we've got our heart rate increasing. As our heart rate increases, this is also going to increase blood pressure, and our body enters an alert, but also an anxious state. Okay, so think of fight or flight, how that feels in your body. We can tell that there's an escalation happening internally, and our body does enter a more alert state, but often that alertness can be accompanied with anxiety. Now, the opposite chain of the nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, essentially does the exact opposite. And so this is your body's relaxed response. When activated, your heart rate decreases, your blood pressure drops so that your body can digest and repair itself. You can also think of your parasympathetic nervous system as the brakes that slow things down. Okay, and so now the common term for the parasympathetic nervous system is also rest and digest mode. And that's just due to the fact that when we go into a relaxed state, our body focuses on digestion, unlike when we're in the opposite state. And so when we're in fight or flight mode, the body's not worried about digesting, the body's worrying about performing. Okay, and so that's just a basic rundown of how the autonomic nervous system works. And what's interesting about the autonomic nervous system, just as the name implies, we've got auto, so you can think automatic, is that all of these things, so all of this escalation of the nervous system and de-escalation of the nervous system are happening automatically. But the interesting thing is that we can actually, what I like to call, hack into the autonomic nervous system, and we can actually control and regulate our nervous system in different ways. And this is where we get into the techniques of meditation, what they teach us, and how essentially that's what we're doing is we're tapping into our nervous system, and we're sending signals to de-escalate and to calm the nervous system. All right. And so now that we have a basic understanding of how the autonomic nervous system works, let's just come back to the focus of the parasympathetic nervous system. And so again, this is the relaxed response. And the reason we're going to focus on the parasympathetic nervous system is because this is the part of our nervous system that activates when we meditate. And so this was going to start to help you make sense of how meditation is actually basically changing your nervous system or altering the state of your nervous system. As when we're practicing meditation, we're activating the parasympathetic nervous system, also known as rest and digest mode. All right, and so let's look at what actually happens in the body when the parasympathetic nervous system activates. and then we'll connect that back to meditation. And so the first thing that happens when the parasympathetic nervous system activates is our breath begins to slow down. And you can probably relate to that. You know, when you're in stressed or anxious states, obviously we breathe more shallow, more rapid, or if we enter a really tense state, we might hold our breath altogether. However, when we're in the parasympathetic nervous system, one of the things we notice is that breath is slow, okay, slow and deep. Now, when activated, the parasympathetic nervous system does this by constricting the bronchi. And so the bronchi is actually the passageway of the throat that enters into the lungs. And so what's interesting is that the bronchi constricts, and as it constricts, this slows down the airflow into the lungs. And so once breathing slows down, the body relaxes and enters a resting state. And so what's so fascinating about that is that just says it all right there. Slow breathing is what starts to shift us from the fight or flight mode into the resting state. And so that happens by the bronchi constricting. Now, we can't constrict our bronchi consciously, but one of the things we can do is slow down our breathing in other ways. And so I'm actually going to get to a technique when we practice at the end of this session where we will consciously be constricting our throat. And so that's one thing we can do is constrict the throat area, as this has the same effect. It slows down breathing, and as our breathing slows down, this is going to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. And this is how we actually get all of the benefits of meditating. Now, as a result of our breathing slowing down, the next thing we see is our heart rate starts to decrease. And so if you are somebody that has a smartwatch, if you have an Apple Watch or a heart rate monitor of any kind, I really encourage you, when we get to the practice of at the end of this seminar, is to look at your heart rate before we begin and then check in after and see for yourself just how heart rate goes down, and also blood pressure drops as a result of that. And so even just those two effects right there have significant and tremendous correlation to health in general. And so if we can bring down our heart rate and we can reduce blood pressure, the effect that that has on our overall health is amazing, not only on the cardiovascular system, but also just how we feel emotionally, right? If we can stay in a low resting heart rate, that just means we're in a calm and peaceful state. And so that is amazing in and of itself. Now, the next thing we see actually takes place in the digestive tract. And so one of the main things that happens when we enter rest and digest mode or a relaxed state is that the body focuses on digestion. And that's why it's called rest and digest mode. And the main reason for that is due to how blood flow redirects when we're in fight or flight versus rest and digest mode. And so if you think about fight or flight mode, we know that more blood flow pumps to the extremities of your body, so your arms, your legs. The major muscles are needed to perform. And so blood flow redirects to those major muscles. Now, as a result of that, blood flow comes away from the digestive tract. And so this just means there's a huge connection to digestion and stress. And so this makes sense because there are a lot of digestive issues that anyone who is dealing with chronic stress can develop. We think of IBS, for instance, irritable bowel syndrome. Stress is one of the biggest causes of something like this. And so this just has to do with the fact that blood flow redirects away from the digestive tract. And so if we're in a constant state of stress, that's going to affect digestion. And digestion is what is necessary for the body to keep up with every single function, right? We think of how the body repairs itself. Digestion is a key role in all of that. We think of all of the hormones our body needs to produce to support the endocrine system. And so if we're not digesting, the body can't perform, it can't function the way that it's supposed to. And so this is why mindfulness not only helps us with all of these things, this is what's literally happening in our body when we practice. And so when we get into the practice, one of the things you might notice is that your stomach might start to gurgle. You might hear noises in your stomach. And that is simple, or there's simple science behind that. And that's just due to the fact that the blood flow is redirecting to your stomach and digestive tract. And so you might notice that happening. But the main thing to focus on is more so than anything, just slowing down the breath, as that's what's going to trigger the rest of these responses within the body. But it really does start with breathing. And this is why breathing plays a huge role in meditation, not only breathing slowly and consciously, but then allowing our breath to happen effortlessly. And so both of these types of breathing are going to set off that chain reaction in the rest of the body. Okay, now I'm just going to check in with our time here because I want to make sure that we have an adequate amount of time for our practice. And so let's just go over these statistics quickly, as this will just further identify how important or how necessary it is to have a practice of reducing stress, even if it's not meditation, as stress is one of the things that really plays a bigger role in our health, more so than anything. And so I call this the silver lining of stress. And that's due to the fact that the first statistics are a little overwhelming. In fact, they stress you out even more, which has the reverse effect. But there is sort of this interesting fact that I'm going to share with you at the end that sort of makes light of all of it and actually allows us to see how stress is really important in our life, and how the goal should never be to get rid of stress, but rather the goal should be to learn how to manage stress, as A, getting rid of stress is impossible, and B, it's not how our nervous system, brain, and body are meant to work. And so let's just talk about the effects of stress first. Now, these statistics come from the CDC, so the Center for Disease and Control in the United States. So the CDC estimates that 75% of all doctors' visits are caused by stress. And so even just that first statistic in itself says it all. 75% of all doctor visits are caused by stress. In fact, the top 6 leading causes of death have stress listed as a major contributing factor. And some leading experts claim that 90% of all diseases caused by stress. And so that's sort of the scary fact, but let's get to the light at the end of the tunnel. And so stress isn't all bad. What's interesting is studies have proven that short-term stress can actually boost your immune system. However, when stress is chronic, it starts to have negative impact on your immune system. So that just means the stress response is actually a healthy thing. Even cortisol. Cortisol is the body's main stress hormone. When our body releases cortisol, cortisol is actually an anti-inflammatory. Now, when we run into issues is when we're pumping cortisol through our body all the time, it starts to have the opposite effect. It causes inflammation. And so that just means that stress is a good thing. Getting into fight or flight mode is not a bad thing. Of course, we want to learn to manage our responses while we're in fight or flight mode, but getting into that escalated nervous system is a good thing. It boosts your immune system. Think of it as like a hot sauna. Go into a hot sauna to get the heart working to, improve cardiovascular function, because it has a positive effect. Now, if you're in that sauna all day, every day, you're going to start to have that reverse effect, right? And so that just means stress is positive if we get into that opposite state of the nervous system. And so it's important to get into fight or flight mode if we're balancing that, if we're down regulating, if we're coming back to that rest and digest mode. And so this is where the practice of meditation fits in. Okay. And so try not to overthink any of this science. The main thing is for it to help you understand what's happening in your body, what's happening in your brain as a result of that. And more importantly, to realize that it's so important for you to have a practice that brings you into the parasympathetic nervous state. And so anything that relaxes you, anything that calms you, think of your healthy strategies. There's so many of them, right? Like even taking time in nature, grounding, taking your shoes off, putting your feet on the earth, making time for passions, hobbies that make you feel good, relax your body, exercise. We can think of all of the things that really do achieve the same thing. But when it comes to getting into a state of rest, meditation is an amazing practice for down regulating. Okay. And so like, it's great to be physical, for instance, it's great to be active, but it's also important to make sure that you are really getting into that rest and digest mode. And this is where we see meditation as being a practice that is one of the most effective, if not the most effective ways to downregulate your body, to get into that parasympathetic state. Okay, and so we're going to practice that now. We are going to take a moment to get into a mindful state, and we're I'm going to take you through a few techniques. And so number one is going to be a breathing exercise. The breathing exercise is meant to slow down your breath, and it's meant to start to trigger that response that happens in your heart rate, and also bringing more blood flow back to the stomach. And the breathing exercise is really simple. It's a practice of slowing down the breath. There will be 2 parts to this. The first part is what I call sounded breath. And so we're constricting our throat, coming back to that science I shared with you of how the bronchi constricts and how when it constricts, that's that narrowing of that passageway slows down our breathing. And so what we're going to do is constrict the throat. And if you're finding this technique difficult, let it go. Don't overthink it. If you're feeling like, oh, I don't know what he's talking about, it can take a little bit of practice. It's one of those techniques that you might not get right away. And so feel free to drop that technique altogether. However, try to stay with the count, because the count is a slow count. And as we work with that slow count, this is really going to bring us into the parasympathetic nervous system. Okay, now once we go through the breathing exercise, I'll then instruct you to let your breath flow naturally. Letting your breath flow naturally and effortlessly on its own just means that we're not controlling it, we're not forcing it, we're just allowing our body to breathe. As you know, this is something our body does for us every moment of every day, and we don't have to think about it. But one of the things we do want to practice in meditation is observing the breath, being aware of our breathing, as our breathing is constantly triggering states within our nervous system. And so as we focus on our breath and we let it flow effortlessly, this is what brings us into not only an aware state, so a conscious state, as our breath gives us something to focus on, but it also ensures that the breath continues to flow smoothly and slowly so that we stay in that parasympathetic nervous system. All right, now another thing we're going to do is body scanning. And the main reason we're body scanning is to relax every muscle in the body. And the science behind a body scan is very simple. When we're in fight or flight mode, one of the responses that takes place in our body is muscles enter a tensed state. And this is important. Tensed muscles are strong muscles. And so if you need to perform, if you're going through a really intense workout, if you're, let's say, defending yourself and you're in an intense fight, anything that revolves around you performing, the muscles need to tense in order for you to perform. And so that just means when we're in fight or flight mode, muscles tense. And so if we relax every muscle by scanning our body, it just means our awareness goes from top to bottom. As we focus on every muscle, we want to relax that muscle. And as we relax that muscle, think of the nervous system. The body's always communicating with the mind. And so as muscles relax, that signal travels to your brain and it tells your brain to relax. As when the body's relaxed, the mind's relaxed. When the mind is tense, the body's tense. Both are in constant communication with one another, and fight or flight mode tenses muscles. And so if we relax muscles, again, that's going to bring us into a relaxed state, which is the parasympathetic nervous system. Okay, and then we'll finish with reflection. That just means taking a moment to check in. I like to ask myself questions at the end of my practice, as the idea is that when we quiet the mind, when we let go of all of the noise and clutter and stress that's taking place in the mind, that quiet mind brings us to a state where we can then go back and solve problems, right? Of course, thinking is necessary. Meditation is about stopping your mind from thinking. It's about quieting the mind, but the mind is meant to think. However, it's like a computer. If you're running 1,000 programs, your mind or your computer becomes less efficient. If you start to close windows, which is what meditation's doing, it's letting a lot of the unnecessary thoughts go that we don't want us distracting us from the main thing we should be focusing on. And once the mind's quiet, we're better able to process. Another fact too is more blood flow directs to the frontal lobe, which is the part of our brain that helps us with conscious decision making. And so when we go into that parasympathetic nervous system, that state of rest and digest, more blood flow goes to the frontal lobe. And that is the part of your brain you need to make responsible decisions, to actually think things through. And so it makes sense to then come back to thinking and problem solving after you've taken a moment to enter your parasympathetic nervous system, after you've taken a moment to let go of the unnecessary thoughts or the stressful thoughts that are going to take you away from the real solutions. Okay. So without further ado, let's get into our practice. This will just be a really simple, I'll try to keep it tight, like 7-minute practice, just so you can get a real sense of how even 7 minutes can affect your body and bring you into that relaxed state. Okay, and so I'm going to come out of my presentation so you can once again see me, and just know that there is actually nothing to see while we're practicing. I will keep my camera on, but my eyes are going to be closed. There's nothing you need to look at. So I really encourage you to just sit comfortably. And so take a moment to uncross your ankles. Bring your feet as wide as your hips so that if you were to look down, you can see that your feet are as wide as the hips and they're grounded on the floor beneath you. You want to actually be able to feel the floor and support beneath you. Now, try to just sit up tall in whatever chair you're in. If you do want to take a moment and like slide a pillow behind your back, if you need that extra support to help you to sit tall, go ahead and just take a moment to prepare yourself. And another piece of alignment here is just allowing your hands to rest onto your knees. And you can just have your palms facing down or facing up, whatever is more comfortable for you. And then from here, I invite you to close your eyes, settle into stillness if possible. And right away, I want you to bring your focus into the soles of your feet. And I want you to feel your feet on the ground. Notice any sensations in the soles of your feet. Maybe you feel blood flow and tingle in this area. Now, as you feel your toes, I want you to relax your toes at the same time. And then feel the tops of your feet. Concentrate on your ankles for a moment, feeling your ankles. Now, when you feel your calf muscles, I want you to relax them completely. Relax them even more. And then feel the blood flow and any sensations arising in your calves. Now feel up your shins. Feel the fronts of your knees. Think of relaxing your knees at the same time. Feel the backs of your knees. Feel your hands resting on your knees. Now, as you focus on your thigh muscles, relax your thighs as much as you can. Keep relaxing your thighs and feeling them. Try to relax your hamstrings and feel your hamstrings. Right, now feel the chair or support beneath you and just notice the weight of your body pressing down into that support. Now feel your fingers. I want you to relax them as much as you can, and then just notice the blood flow and awareness in your fingers. Relax your palms and feel your palms. Relax your wrists and feel your wrists. Relax and feel your forearms. Relax and feel your elbows. Relax and feel your biceps. Do the same with your triceps. Relax and feel your shoulders. Relax and feel your jaw. Relax and feel all of the muscles around your mouth. Maybe even your lips will peel apart. Relax your forehead. Focus on the center of your forehead. Feel the top of your head. And now exhale through your nose to empty. Really slowly breathe in through your nose. Now open your mouth. Imagine you're fogging up a window with your breath. Go. And then do that again. Really slow inhale through your nose. Open your mouth. Imagine you're fogging up a window. Go. Now this time, inhale through your nose. Try to make that same sound, only exhale through your nose instead of your mouth. Good. Now inhale through your nose. Try to keep that sound happening. And so you're constricting your throat so you can hear your breath coming in And keeping your throat constricted so that as you exhale through your nose, you can hear that sound of your breath. It sounds like a H-A, ha sound, or like the ocean. If you are having a hard time with that sound, don't worry. I want you to just stay with the count of the breath, okay? And so keeping your throat constricted if you can, I want you to inhale through your nose for 4, nice and slow, 3, 2, 1. Hold your breath at the top. Try to keep that sounded breath if possible, exhaling through your nose 4, slowly 3, 2, 1. Hold your breath. Okay. Inhale really slowly for 4, slow down your breath even more, 3, 2, 1. Hold your breath at the top. As you hold your breath, relax every muscle in your body. And then exhale slowly, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold your breath, relax every muscle in your body. Inhale slowly, 4, 3, slow down your inhale even more, 2, 1. Hold your breath. As you hold, relax every muscle in your body and feel every muscle. Exhaling slowly, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold your breath, relax every muscle. Again, inhale for 4, 3, slow down your inhale, 2, 1. Hold, focus your awareness on every part of your body as you relax. Exhale for 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold, relax every muscle. And one more time. Inhale for 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold, feel every muscle, relax every muscle. Exhale 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold your breath, relax. And just do that 2 more times on your own, counting to 4. Okay, now let your breath happen on its own. Try not to control it. Don't worry about counting anymore. Just let your body breathe. And all I want you to do is pay attention to your breath. And as you're paying attention to your breath, see if you can also feel every part of your body at the same time. And anytime your mind drifts or a thought comes up that distracts you, practice returning your focus to your natural breath and tuning into your entire body from head to toe, staying relaxed. And now, before you open your eyes, I just want you to ask yourself one question. Don't overthink the answer. Usually it's the first thought that comes to your mind. And I want you to ask yourself, if there was just one small change you could implement in your life that would have the greatest impact on your happiness and well-being, what would that one change be? And then whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes. Now, as I expected, we're close to 1. And I know that we were supposed to allow about 10 minutes for questions and such. And so I'll get right into that so I don't waste any time there.
Anthony, so first of all, that was amazing. I was with you the last 8 minutes following along. I just, and I also sent you a message in the backstage chat is my ankles were crossed.
Okay.
When you said uncross your ankles. So I thought that was funny, and maybe the others listening also were caught in the same situation. So that was fantastic. Thank you so much for that. The hour is almost up, and I'll throw just a quick question at you. First, we had a question come in about whether this was recorded and whether it will be available. It was recorded, is recorded, and it will be available on our YouTube channels, on our website, on the webinar page. Also on the webinar page, you will also see all the updates for future webinars and past webinar recordings that we've offered. So please head there to see this recording. It'll probably be posted later today or tomorrow, so keep an eye out. The second question, and Anthony, you feel free up to you how deep you want to dive into this one. We have a question here from Stephen saying that I am 59 and out of shape, overweight. What's the best way to start yoga?
Yeah, great question. So I would say try to find a practice that is about 60 minutes in length. I would avoid hot yoga at first, unless you know yourself and you do have a high heat tolerance. Then I would say try hot yoga. If you know that heat is something you struggle with, I don't know if you sauna already. If not, I would say start with a not hot practice and try to find something in between, because some of the practices that are really restorative or gentle might stop us from connecting to the practice. I know some people get bored very easily. And so if you don't want to start with something too gentle, but you also don't want to throw yourself into an extreme practice either. And so I'd say start with 60 minutes, not hot. Look for a level 1 or beginner's practice. And I always recommend flow or vinyasa yoga. That's because I connect with that style the most. And it really can be great for everyone because it's a perfect balance of vigor where you're going to condition your body, as obviously you want to get in shape and you want to feel like you're seeing improvements in your body or your physical condition. And so try to choose something in between for a beginner. That is a flow practice.
Also, just to add to that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but like unlike maybe some other stuff, like if you're joining a softball or a lacrosse game, there's certain things you have to keep up with and almost perform in that activity. But yoga is pretty, no pun intended, flexible in the sense that anyone can kind of follow and listen, but take it to whatever direction they want to. There's no need to overstretch or overpush or damage yourself in any way.
Exactly. Right? Yeah, and it really does create an environment where if you need to take a break, you feel like it's okay to do that, which is the most important thing. And if that environment, if you stumble across a teacher that is strict or whatever, just know that more than anything that is one of the basic principles that should always be applied to the practice, is listening to your body. And so that means skipping postures altogether until you feel comfortable doing them or modifying them as much as you need to.
And meditation, breathing, what would you say the best way to kind of start with that practice? Is it something like we just did, the 7-8 minutes of just easing into it? And is it wise for someone to even start with 2 minutes of it? Will they see any gains from it, in your opinion?
Absolutely. That is one of the practices that I recommend for everyone. Now there are different types of breathing exercises that might be more suitable for certain individuals more than others. And so to give you an example, there's breathing exercises that are meant to be energizing. And so if you're feeling really anxious, I wouldn't suggest a certain breathing exercise that's going to escalate your nervous system more, because you'd want to downregulate. And so if you're introducing yourself to the practice, I always say do something like what we just did, where we're scanning our body from head to toe, relaxing every muscle. And so literally you could just take 5 minutes, sit there, close your eyes, start at the top of your head, and each body part one by one, bring your awareness down, relax each body part and feel each body part for a moment. And that could be a complete practice in and of itself. If you want to throw in a little bit of breath work, just do a breathing exercise where you're counting your breath. For say a count of 4 like we did, holding for a brief moment, exhaling for a count of 4, just trying to keep a nice even slow breath is the goal, as that's going to bring the most benefit, is just slowing down our breath and paying attention to our breath. And that is enough to start right there.
Yeah, fantastic. So one more question just came in before we wrap up. As a massage therapist suggesting practices for clients, are there any conditions, in your opinion, where you wouldn't recommend yoga to certain individuals?
Yeah, and I think that's where, consulting a doctor is the number one thing, right? Is like going to a healthcare professional. Of course, it should be someone that you respect and trust, and that might not be your doctor. Maybe that is your therapist. Maybe that is your kinesiologist, somebody with a degree that you connect with. You know, I'd say go to someone that you trust. Of course, a doctor is a great place to start and see what they say in terms of conditions, because it really is one of those practices that you could injure yourself if you're working with an injury, for instance, or if you've had recent surgery, you might have limitations. And I would say stay away from yoga until you've healed that. And so I would just speak to a professional and go based off, you know, circumstance. And so it really is dependent on the situation.
Yeah, it makes sense. And also, again, just to add a little piece to that, is like yoga is such a general term. Like, you know, many people with different limitations, different injuries can still practice yoga. So again, it is kind of fluid and flexible in terms of what it is you can practice. For example, a shavasana pose where you're laying down and, you know, breathing, focusing, meditating. There's probably not many contraindications to a yoga practice of that sort. So I guess it depends also what type of practice and what it is that person is wanting to achieve. I'm assuming the question does suggest though some physical activity and, you know, maybe more demanding part of the yoga.
Exactly.
But thank you for that answer, and thank you for a fantastic presentation webinar. Again, this was recorded, will be posted on our website, on the webinar page, and on YouTube. Anthony Berlingeri, thank you so much. Again, we have a Hatha yoga course explaining all this and explaining some practical demonstrations, you know, with clients, on yourself, how you can really integrate yoga into again, any sort of physical protocol, treatment protocol that you're doing. Yoga can always benefit that, always add to that, even if it's, again, little bits and pieces there just to add on top, but it will help. So we do have that on the website. You'll keep seeing more of Anthony. We have more coming. So thank you very much. Any last words from you, Anthony, before we wrap this up?
Thank you. Thank you for joining. Thanks for setting this up, Danny.
Of course. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and we'll see you at the next one. Bye-bye.